Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to our session. This is in partnership with Clear Review, and the title is Empowerment, the Secret Building Blocks of Happy, Healthy, High-Performing Teams. So my name is Kieran Howells, and I'm from HR Grapevine. And today I have the pleasure of being joined by Nick Gallimore, the Director of Talent Transformation and Insight at Clear Review. So what are we going to be talking about? Well, Nick is going to walk you through why there has never been a better time to empower your people to deliver outcomes that you never thought were possible. He's also going to explain the relationship between empowerment and well-being, and also why performance management is the secret sauce for achieving all of this. So before I hand over to Nick to get us started, I'd just like to mention that if you have any questions at all, you have a really rare chance here to ask Nick those questions that you may have. So get them in via the option on the sidebar of your screen, and we'll get through as many as we possibly can at the end. So without further ado, I'd like to pass over to Nick. So Nick, take it away.
Thank you very much, Kieran, and good morning, everybody. It's fantastic to be here, spending a bit of time with you this morning. Really appreciate you taking some time out of what I'm sure, and we're going to talk about it in a minute, some pretty stacked diaries. As Kieran said in his kind introduction, I'm Nick Gallimore, Director of Talent Transformation and Insight here at Clear Review. And I am indeed going to be talking as passionately as I can this morning about something that I believe and we believe here at Clear Review is fundamental to the ongoing journey that I think many of us are on, and that's empowerment. The concept that it is possible, and we believe in our grasp, to create organisations with high levels of visibility, accountability, and ultimately empowerment. And obviously, I talked to you this morning at frankly quite an interesting time in certainly in the life of an HR practitioner. Just as a point of reference, I'm sat here based in rural Northamptonshire, of all places. A place where we didn't think something as bizarre as a petrol shortage would be a thing, but it turns out that indeed our local garage has in fact run out, and we are indeed sitting here talking about such scary things as fundamental labour shortages. As I said, never a better time for us all to be thinking about empowerment. And I'm going to argue today that actually, although our challenges and the problems we've faced feel short term, they feel very front and centre, I'm going to argue that actually we need to go a little bit deeper to understand what's really going on, and that actually empowerment is not only the way forward, but actually super achievable just by shining a light on one of our most embedded and often historic processes. That's performance management. Now, just a bit of housekeeping before I go on. So, as Kieran said, I'm going to talk this morning probably for about half an hour, and then we'll be open for some questions. Any questions you have at all, I'll be delighted to take them from you. Anything that you wish I'd covered, anything that's not clear, anything else that pops into mind that you'd like to have a conversation around, please file them in the Q&A box. Find a bit of housekeeping as well. Now, many of you will know or may have come across Clear Review before. If you haven't, so just as a bit of background, Clear Review was an HR software company founded in 2017, and founded with one aim in mind, and that was to fix performance management and reinvent it as a tool that moved it away from being the mechanism by which we think about pay rises and bonus, and towards being a real performance differentiator, a tool that helps organisations perform better. Now, what you might not know, but it will become clear as I go through this morning's session, so it's important for me to point out, is Clearview is now part of the Advanced family. For those of you not come across Advanced before, Advanced is one of the UK's largest enterprise software companies, and recently through the acquisition of both Clearview and Mitterfinch, which is a class-leading workforce management solution, have created a software company in our own right, Advanced HCM. So as you see reference to both Advanced and Clearview through this presentation, hopefully that helps clear that up. Advanced HCM in and of itself has a simple mission in mind, and that mission is to make work better. We believe that those organisations who are able to improve the working experience and focus on the experience of their people are the ones who are going to win as we move forwards. And I'm sure you'll all agree there's no better time for us to be talking about making work better. And I'm going to start with that idea, what's going on at the moment. And I'm going to start just by asking us just to reflect, think about all of the things that are kind of happening around us at the moment. And funnily enough, just to kind of help me pivot this, I've been spending a lot of time recently talking to HR directors and HR leaders and understanding and trying to get a sense of what's the current pain points that we're feeling as a collective. What are the things that we're finding challenging? And if I summed it up in one slide, I would sum it up a little bit like this. And I've just realised as I'm talking that I'm talking about slides, and actually I'm not sharing my screen, am I? So bear with me whilst I correct myself. You'd be glad to know you've not missed anything. So here we go. I'm now sharing my screen. There we go. Hopefully, I think you can all see that. So yeah, so I spend a lot of time talking to HR leaders, to HR practitioners, understanding what's going on in the market. These are the four areas that I'm reliably informed are really putting pressure on us at the moment. The first, kind of talent, and in particular recruitment and retention. Obviously, the market's very hot right now. The kind of example, the front and center example, seems to be in the HGV driving space. We can't retain them. We can't hire them. It's interesting. I was talking to a group of HR leaders last week, and just as a bit of fun, I decided it might help the group work a bit more efficiently if we played a little game. So I asked the group to imagine that their life in HR right now is a film. And I got them to draw something that would help me understand what's the film, what film are you living in? And interestingly enough, I had a group of about 8 or 10, I can't remember. Interestingly enough, 2 people drew exactly the same thing. They just drew a bus. And I knew straight away what they'd drawn. They'd drawn the bus from the film Speed. Right? I'm sure you've seen the film Speed, but in case you haven't, concept is there's a bomb on a bus, and if the bus drops below 50 miles an hour, the bomb goes bang. And it kind of resonated with me. It does feel a little bit like we are on the bus in the film Speed, which, struggling to hang on to people, struggling to replace people. We've got, lots going on, lots of challenges around engagement and well-being. Obviously, that's why we're here today to talk about these things, the in particular level of burnout. Our teams are tired and need help. We are still figuring out hybrid working. We are still working out how do we reorganize our businesses to work in entirely different ways, and that's still a challenge. We're learning what works and what doesn't work. And obviously, we've got the fourth thing that people are saying to me is we've got pressure on salary costs. It's the one thing that we don't that we struggle with, and we can't click our fingers to fix, but we have some challenge around salary costs. And that's a little bit about how it feels right now, doesn't it? It feels like we've got all of this going on, lots to react to, lots to think about, and it feels like this really obvious. We can point to what's causing it. We've got COVID, and we've got Brexit, and we've got all of the other kind of short-term challenges that are facing us. And it feels like if we can just keep the bus going for long enough, we'll get to the other side. But my challenge back to people I've been talking to, my challenge out this morning as we're here to talk about empowerment, my challenge that I'd like to get everyone thinking about is this. So what's new? The challenges that we've got right now, the headwinds that we feel right now, feel very very real and very current. But the reality is that they are, in fact, rather than purely short term, the reality is the root of what we're seeing around us right now, I believe, and I'm going to argue for the next couple of minutes, it's far more systemic. It's far deeper within the very essence of how we run our businesses, as opposed to being purely short-termist. Now, that sounds a bit alarmist, so I'm sorry, but let me just share. For those of you who've been on a webinar with me before, you know I love data. So I'm going to share a little bit of data, not too much, I promise, just a little bit this morning. I'll share a little bit for you. The first is I want to just wind back before the pandemic, forget about everything that's happened. I know that's not realistic, but just go with me for a minute. So wind back to 2019 and have a think about employee engagement. Global levels of employee engagement. It turns out that back in 2019, only 35% of our people were actively engaged at work. This number comes from Gallup, who do an annual worldwide survey of employee engagement. So just think about that, 65% of our people not actively engaged at work. So they're either disengaged or they're somewhere between being engaged and disengaged. I don't know about you, but that's 35% is quite a shocking number. And actually, in fact, the reality is that number hadn't moved for a number of years. So despite all of the extra investment, the extra focus on employee engagement, the reality was pre-pandemic, we had a fundamental challenge around engaging people. People just weren't that excited to come work for us. In that respect, probably no surprise that now things have changed somewhat, that people feel like they're quite willing to leave. And the second number, and again, I've talked about this before, so apologies if you've seen it before, but the second systemic fundamental number that we should all understand as we think about this concept of empowerment and what are we going to do moving forward is the concept of productivity. So productivity is super important. If you want to grow an organization, there's two ways to do it. You either bring more people in to create more output, so more people doing things, or you focus on trying to make your existing people more productive, i.e. have people doing more things. And that applies at the macroeconomic level too. So if you want to grow an economy, you either increase the labor supply or you increase productivity. Sadly for us, back in 2019, the rate of productivity growth in the UK was 0.3%. This is a really stark stat. We should be really concerned about it. In fact, the Royal Society for Statistics called it the stat of the decade in 2019. Declining this level of productivity growth is the lowest since the early 1800s. It's a huge problem. So I'm making the point, and I'm hamming it a little bit, but even pre-pandemic, actually, we had pretty low levels of engagement, pretty poor levels of productivity growth. We weren't that great at engaging people. We weren't that great at helping people become more productive. Now, there are some things that have changed. Absolutely some things that have changed, particularly through the pandemic. These numbers haven't, but there are some things that have changed. So Indeed released a report recently around how people are feeling and what's, particularly around their well-being as a result of the pandemic. And there's three numbers I'll highlight from there that I think are kind of interesting. Firstly, 67% of all of us believe that burnout has worsened since the start of the pandemic, I should stress. So already low levels of engagement, really poor kind of levels of productivity growth. And now 67% of us believe that burnout has worsened. 27% of all workers are unable to unplug from work. I'm sure many of us will empathise with that, but nearly a third of us can't switch off. It's not good. And 53% of us are working longer hours. And I'm sure when we think about well-being, we think about engagement, we think about what's happening right now and what's affecting us, and some of those four things that are going on. Clearly, whilst the fundamentals were there, there's something in the way that everyone's feeling, our people are feeling, that has changed. And it's probably no surprise then that we're starting to see some of the attrition that we see and some of the things that are kind of burning quite brightly. Now, being an HR software company, we're always interested in trying to understand what's going to happen. So always interested in trying to predict the future. And about 3 months ago, we did a piece of research. There's a link to it in the slides you'll see in a minute. And you can head over to clearreview.com and download it. It's completely free. But we were really interested in how people were feeling, right? So we've got these already pretty damning baseline position. We've been through a kind of collectively really difficult experience. So how are we all feeling now? How are we, what are we worried about? What are we thinking of doing now? We're going back to work. So we commissioned a piece of research, went out and asked more than 1,000 people, particularly people who would pre-pandemic were working predominantly in an office, and post-pandemic during pandemic were working at home. Found loads of really interesting things. I'm not going to take you through all of them because I promised not too much data, but I'll take you through a couple of really interesting points. The first was we asked directly, this was 3 months ago, how many of you are currently considering looking for a new role? Answer was 50% of people were feeling in such a way that they were considering looking for a new role. If you're wondering if that's a lot, the answer is yes, it is. In fact, it's 43% more than the baseline level that we would expect. So 43% more people are currently, or were 3 months ago, considering looking for a new role. So it's a huge uplift. So it makes you wonder why. What's really driving that? Is it one of these short-term factors? Is it this kind of, is it pandemic related? Is it Brexit related? What is it? What's if even despite those fundamentals, what is it that's changed? Now, there's lots of quite interesting research out there that's tried to tackle this. My favorite comes from the Achievers Workforce Institute. I'm not associated with them anyway, but you can, again, there's a link to the survey I'm about to reference in the slide deck that you can download. They do a big annual survey of employee engagement and retention, and they ask a really interesting question. It's one of my favorite questions. It's which of the following best describes why you would stay with your current employer? Now, they asked this question this year, just as we came out of the pandemic, and this is what they found. They found that 23% of us would list work-life balance as the reason why we would stay with our current employer. 21% listed recognition. Unsurprisingly, 19% talking about comp and bends. We're not going to talk about comp and bends too much today. And the next best answer at 19% was having a great working relationship with my manager. So work-life balance, being recognised, great relationship with my manager. That's what's really driving people right now. That's what's kind of concerning people. So we've got people who generally are feeling more likely to leave. Actually, the reasons they would stay are kind of a work-life balance, being recognised, and having a great working relationship with our manager. Leads on to another question, which is really, okay, if that's why you would stay, what is it, what if anything, are people worried about? So fortunately for me, and unfortunately for you, because I keep saying no more data, just one more, I promise. This is another question that we've sought to answer. Again, being an HR software company and wanting to be able to predict the future, we wanted to understand what people are worried about as they think about going back to the office. Another piece of research, actually a slightly different piece of research to the first one I referenced, this time done by Advanced. Again, there's a link in the slide. Asked a slightly different set of questions. One of the questions we asked was, when thinking about a return to the office, what are you worried about the most? What's concerning you? And it turns out that the biggest thing that we're worried about is, and 47% of us are worried about this, is maintaining work-life balance. That's almost double, by the way, of those who are worried about keeping the job. Again, if you want the reference, it's there. It's a big productivity report commissioned by Advanced. So we've got, I promise, no more data. So we've got this. We're all on a bit. It feels like we're on a bus, and we're running out of control, and we're just about holding it back. We've got issues around retention. We've got issues around engagement and well-being. We've got issues around or challenges, I should say, around hybrid. And it's really tempting, I think, for us to think that what's driving some of that is short term. But actually, what we know a good deal about how our people are feeling, and we know that actually it's work-life balance, it's recognition, and it's the relationship with our manager that people are really craving in one way, shape, or form. So onto empowerment. Let's talk about empowerment for a minute, because we're fundamentally here at Clear Review, we see this unique set of circumstances that we find ourselves in right now as HR practitioners to do something different. And fundamentally, we don't believe now is the time for policy. So policy around hybrid, or policy around well-being, or policy around engagement isn't going to treat some of the systemic challenges that we draw back to historically. We've struggled to drive up engagement levels. We've struggled to make people more productive. And we've got people who are in our organizations who fundamentally are asking us for better work-life balance, and who fundamentally are asking us for more recognition. So now is not, we don't believe, the time for policy. Now is the time instead for us to have a conversation with our organizations, with our leadership, about the concept of empowerment. And what do I mean by empowerment? Just to be clear, and I've debated this with myself endlessly, but fundamentally I've arrived at a definition. And what I mean by empowerment is really clear. Empowerment is the idea that it is possible to provide employees with a degree of autonomy and control, in enabling people to act independently and be accountable for their results. The sense of empowerment and the endless possibilities that creating an organization with full of employees who have that sense of accountability, who are willing to act independently, who care about the results, and who can be relied upon to exercise their own autonomy and control. That is what I believe we need to be having a conversation around right now. How can we achieve this? If we could achieve this, and if we could move the needle in our own organizations, to what extent would that address not only those short-term challenges around retention and recruitment, and around engagement, and around the other short-term challenges, but also around some of those systemic problems that are here anyway, and that are underlying and that aren't going away. So the next question you might be sitting there asking is, okay, that sounds great. I like the idea of empowerment, but what does that mean? Well, I think what does that look like? Well, here's the empowerment circle, as I'm going to call it. Empowerment is if you think about it, you try to imagine, what that might mean, and how do you generate that in your organization? Well, it's a multi-step process, and it starts with a sense of alignment to the organization's purpose. So I'm looking at this now from the perspective of an individual. So how do I, as an individual, how could I become empowered? What does that mean? What needs to happen to me? Well, first of all, I've got to buy into the organization's purpose. I've got to understand and agree with and be interested in achieving what the organization is aiming for. I said at the start of this session, I work for Advanced. Our purpose is to make work better. I pretty much think I was probably the reason I was put on the earth. So from me, a very strong alignment to the organization's purpose. Empowerment also comes from understanding what you've got to do. It's really good quality, relevant, meaningful goals that you understand. So if I want to be empowered, I need to understand, okay, what's really important? What do I need to do today, tomorrow, next week, the week after, next month, in order to achieve and help play my part in achieving and supporting the organization's purpose. It's also about having really good quality, frequent, real-time feedback. It's vital for me and vital for any individual who's seeking empowerment. If I don't know if what I'm doing is the right thing, if I don't know if the output that I'm generating is correct, I'm never going to be able to course correct. So I need feedback. It's also about having really good quality, regular, transparent conversations with a really good quality manager who cares about me and is willing to normalize my experience, normalize in particular conversations about how I'm doing, how I'm feeling, as opposed to just what work am I doing. So really good quality coaching conversations. Being empowered also means having a choice, right, about when and where. When do I do my work and how do I do my work? It involves choice. So if I'm aligned to the organization's purpose, I've got relevant, meaningful goals, I've got good quality feedback, I'm having the right conversations, choice and autonomy should really be very straightforward. But critically, can't really have choice and autonomy, that which is really the essence of empowerment, without those steps beforehand. It's about being empowered is also about being willing to take ownership of my results. And I can only clearly take ownership of my results if I understand what the organizational aims are in the first place, and if I have the choice and autonomy of how to do my work, and if I'm having good quality conversations and I'm getting good quality feedback, and I've got the right goals, and I buy into the organisation's purpose. So this is a circle of empowerment, if you like. Now, I know that, and I've been on this journey myself, and I've seen many customers, people I've worked with before, try and go on the empowerment journey. So I know that when we sit and we talk about empowerment, and we talk about how empowered people, generating a sense of empowered people, might enable us to overcome some of those challenges that we're facing, and might enable us to garner a better sense of work-life balance, to put work-life balance in the hands of our people, to put well-being in the hands of our people, to put results in the hands of our people. And it feels like a very challenging journey to go down. How do we achieve this? But the reality is that this, in many senses, all of the things you can see on the screen right now should be the outcomes of a process we already have in our business. Most of us will already have in our business. And that's it. Obviously, we're talking here about organizational goals. We're talking about individual goals. We're talking about recognition. We're talking about manager conversations. We're talking about results, and we're talking about accountability. All of these things should be the outcome of a really good quality performance management process. Sadly, I go back to the reason why here at Clearview we started off on this journey ourselves. Sadly, too often performance management processes, and if you just start to think about your performance management process you use in your business, sadly, performance management processes, generally speaking, are based on, or you start to think about what's associated with that, and you think about annual objectives, which are not really well aligned to your organizational aims. They're focused on ratings. They store feedback up for the big end of year annual appraisal, by which point we've kind of forgotten the thing in the first place. So we're not giving great quality feedback. We're kind of forcing everybody to have conversations at a particular time of the year. We're not allowing that to happen and surface naturally. And we're generating, therefore, this kind of tick box, admin heavy kind of culture around performance management. But actually, if you start to think about this in your mind, and you start to think, okay, if this is the circle of empowerment, if this is how we potentially create happy, healthy, high-performing organization, and but this is the performance management process that we're using, hopefully you can start to link the two. And this is where performance management can be, I think, as Kieran said earlier on, the secret sauce of empowerment. And I'm going to just show you one more slide after this, and then I promise I'm going to stop talking. But for those of you who are not familiar with the concept of modern performance management, often called or referred to as continuous performance management, is a completely different take on performance management. And in particular, it's the methodology, or it's part of the methodology that sits behind the Clearview platform, which, remember, was built specifically to address this problem. Really good quality performance management will drive clarity on organizational strategy. And what work is really important now, it will drive accountability for the right results, and it will help make sense of the work. And if you're wondering what it looks like, it looks a little bit like this. The performance, this is just what a continuous performance management process could garner, by the way. It looks like a process in your organization where goals become agile. So they're not annual anymore. They're not created by managers and passed down. They're created by individuals who own those goals, and they create them through an understanding of the organization's purpose. They're near term, they're not annual, they're really, really well defined, with really clear results and really clear deliverables within them. That's the first building block, if you like, for empowerment. The second is the concept of real-time feedback. We know there's loads of science around this, and there's more slides in this deck I'm not going to take you through. Instead, you can download them with a bit more information about feedback. There's a lot of evidence now which shows that feedback is really fundamental if you want to help your people perform better, if you want to help your people feel empowered. So real-time feedback in the moment, not stored up for later on in the year. Meaningful coaching conversations, we talked about this earlier, so having really great quality conversations between managers and individuals. It's a fundamental part of the continuous performance management approach. It's a fundamental part of the of the continuous performance management toolkit. And equally, a sense that the whole process is optimized for engagement and well-being. And when I say optimized for engagement and well-being, what I really mean is that we normalize in a continuous performance management approach. We should be normalizing conversations around well-being, conversations around engagement, and ideally, all of that. It's kind of it's kind of you lay it out on a slide like this. It looks and feels kind of challenging to do, but if it's wrapped in technology that people love using, it gets that bit easier. So, and as I said, there are some more slides in here. I'm just going to spin through them really quickly, so you've got an idea of what's in there. If you want to take a look at the deck, it's available for download at the end of the show. One more thing to say is that I've just really scratched the surface here, and my aim at the start of this was to talk about how now is a great time for us as organizations or as HR pros to start conversations around empowerment in our organization, and that empowerment leads not only to higher engagement, but it's the way to address our people's well-being concerns and the things that our people are concerned about. If you want to know a bit more, completely free, we have a completely free resource. If you head over to academy.clearreview.com, it's a community of HR professionals interested in this topic, interested in how can I really drive at things like empowerment through performance management. How can I think a bit differently about what I'm doing? So it's completely free, loads of learning resources and an opportunity to go and talk to some other people who are facing really similar challenges. So I think at the start, I said I was going to talk for about half an hour. I think I've talked for about half an hour, so well done to me. I'm going to remember this time to stop sharing my screen, and I'm not sure if we've had any questions come in, but Kieran, I'll go back to you. Thanks very much, everyone, for listening.
Hello, Nick. Yes, thanks so much for that. I think that was extremely eye-opening, and you've given us loads to think about. We have had some questions through, so we will squeeze in as many as we possibly can, and some of them are real thinkers, so sorry to put you on the spot.
That's okay. I like that.
So first things first, this is a great question. I really like the idea of driving empowerment across the organization, but I'm worried that my management community are not ready to drive this type of behavior. Where do I start?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I haven't really talked about this today, but I guess one of the other things that, so I have a lot of conversations around this with HR leaders, and the topic of, I'm trying to find the right words without sounding disparaging, but the topic of kind of manager competency or manager, readiness is really front and center. We've got this kind of issue, I think, with accidental managers across the country. I think, for me, it always, when you're thinking about how do I bring managers and leaders on the journey, it's all, there's a tendency for us to start with the how and to start telling managers how to do things. I much prefer to start telling managers why instead. So I think most managers and leaders, I think if you said to them, hey, would you like to have a team of happy, healthy, high-performing people? If there was a way that we could support you in achieving that, would you be interested? Most managers, hopefully, if they don't say yes, then you've got a problem. But hopefully, most managers are going to agree with that. And I always would encourage us then to have a conversation with managers and leaders about, well, what is performance? Where does performance come from? What is well-being? Where does well-being come from? And start with that answer of why before we start asking managers to behave in a slightly different way. So if you're in that situation, that's what I would advise.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. So on to the next question then. So this person says, we're a very time-focused business and our leadership are really driven to measure and manage people's time. How can we start unpicking this?
Yes, it's a great question. And I often get questions around, particularly around continuous performance management from organizations that have got a workforce where, I don't know, perhaps a large part of the workforce works in the field, or they're not a they're not working in an office, or they've got a very set kind of workflow of tasks they have to get through, and there's always a challenge around how do we think about things like performance management or empowerment in that community. I think I would always, I don't want to repeat myself, but I'll probably go back to the question of why are we measuring time? What's the outcome that we're trying to drive at? Generally speaking, where I've had conversations before where you've got leaders who are interested in managing time, generally speaking, I always would divert people towards the concept of purpose. Let's work back and say, why are we worried about measuring time? What are we trying to achieve as an organization? And how does measuring time help us do that? And when we ask those kind of questions, we can often start to pick up the real reasons for focusing on time. And by the way, the alternative to time, of course, is to think about outcomes. So do we measure, is everyone in the office for 40 hours, or does everybody, do we achieve a particular outcome? So for me, it's just about unpicking it and starting with, well, why? What are we trying to achieve? What are we here for? And therefore, why are we measuring time?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. It is about going back to the drawing board with the concept of the purpose of work, isn't it? Very, very interesting. This is another really interesting one. You talked earlier about organizational purpose. And I think we have a few people who don't buy into where we're headed, and it's causing issues. We have attrition challenges. So there is no desire to address this. How can we solve it?
I mean, that's a kind of classic, it's a kind of classic example, I guess, of the bus from speed example. I think it's, purpose is an interesting one, and in an ideal world, you're working with an organization or leadership that's got a really well defined purpose. But I appreciate that's ideal world, and that's not often how organizations grow and develop, and they often grow in a slightly different way. I think if you've got a concern that people don't buy into purpose, first thing to try and figure out is that because there's a lack of clarity about how purpose is being thought about or communicated. Or is that because people people just don't buy into something that is already communicated? More often than not, it's the former. So it's not that people don't or can't buy into purpose. It's that they just don't understand what it is. So I'd always encourage people to start by going back and doing some work, normally with the senior leadership team, to really dig into what are we here for, and then to make sure we're really communicating that out across the organization.
Mm-hmm. Well, on that point, actually, we've had another one come in that I think kind of fits in nicely there on the communication point there. Obviously, the last year, 18 months plus, has been a challenging time, and for many people, the world of work has changed. And I think a lot of people seem to be struggling with the concept of delivering some of these things remotely. So we have a question here, how basically can we understand / manage performance and deliver feedback specifically for those who are going to remain remote going forwards? Really interested to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think obviously, I think it's interesting because certainly some of the companies I talk to, remote working's not universally a new thing. There are organizations that have grappled with that problem for a long time. The whole issue of I was in an office last week actually, and we had a meeting. About half of us were in the meeting room and half of us were on Teams. And if I'm being really honest, it didn't work very well. And I was kind of commenting and saying, well, this is an interesting thing, challenge of hybrid. And actually, one of the people in the room said, actually, it's always been this way for me. I've been working for home forever, and we've always had these problems. And I think it's the same with feedback. I think there are two things. Firstly, again, it's really important that our leaders and our management community understand the value of feedback, and they understand that feedback doesn't need to be complicated. It can be really straightforward. It can just be an email. It can just be a phone call, but it has to be in the moment. We've got to take those opportunities. And number two, this is where, if you want to drive a feedback culture, it really helps to wrap that in some technology. If you think about how people are used to thinking about performance generally, for those of you on the call, I don't know if you're into your running or your cycling or something like that, you'd be familiar with all the millions of consumer apps there are, your Stravas of the world, to help you perform better. Well, actually, there's an essence to which putting some technology in people's hands, helping them understand that it's about the technology is there to help them perform better, and helping them understand that feedback is a part of helping people perform better is a good way to speed that journey up, if you like.
Mm-hmm. And I guess we're now kind of in the golden age of that technology as well, as a result of the last 18 months.
Yeah, no, very much so. I think the hybrid puzzle has really sharpened the focus on how do we, it's not just about feedback, but how do we communicate with people and include people virtually. So we're definitely seeing huge and significant results from organizations wrapping feedback up, particularly in technology.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right. Okay. I have another question for you here, and I think this is another interesting one. Rather than annual company-wide surveys, what structure to gather feedback across the business would you suggest or recommend?
I assume that we're talking about feedback, the kind of feedback we'd get from an engagement survey, i.e. feedback on the organisation. So when it comes to engagement, my first question I ask anyone is, well, okay, what are you trying to measure, and why are you trying to measure it? So there's millions of ways that you can measure employee engagement. I am and clear of you at our heart, we like to go back to the science to ask ourselves what should you measure. So from my answer to this would be what you really want to understand and what you really want to measure is the concept of work engagement. Work engagement is a particular type of engagement. Effectively, is the degree to which someone enjoys their work. And the reason that I encourage people to think about work engagement is because it's work engagement that predicts performance. So there's lots of other things that we are concerned in think about measuring when it comes to engagement. But we always say, well, what predicts performance? And actually, it's that level of how much you enjoy that flow of work on a day-to-day basis. The other thing to stress is that we all know the challenges of measuring any form of engagement on an annual basis. We all also know the challenges of HR measuring and being accountable for the output of engagement survey results. So however you do it, it's better. I would encourage people to think about doing it on a pulse basis. So always, a tool, and again, you can wrap this in software. I'm not going to plug it, but we've got a tool you can use to see what's going on in real time. But equally, you ideally want to measure something that gives, again, managers and leaders visibility of how their people are feeling, and really challenges them to take the action, as opposed to, traditional annual survey. It all comes back to, HR's now got a set of actions to go and deliver, which isn't the way to get results.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's a fantastic point. I think that will definitely resonate an awful lot with our viewers here. Well, unfortunately, Nick, it seems that we have run out of time. I'm gutted because I think actually we could carry on going down this route. There's so much more to explore, but thank you so much for all of your insight. I'm sure that our audience have found it extremely engaging, and thank you so much to our audience as well for tuning in, and I'm sure this has been really entertaining for you. So we do have some more great content coming up, so stick around, and don't go anywhere.